Well, today's podcast is yet another PSA. It's with some regularity that I feel the need to put out a podcast in a form where the most people will hear every word of it. And today, the topic that could not suffer a paywall is what is now universally described as vaccine hesitancy.
Now, this is a slightly awkward topic. Sam is a friend, and the podcast he released yesterday with Eric Topol was focused, well, it was focused on Dark Horse, but it named me specifically, and it talked extensively about the issues surrounding COVID that we've been focused on for many months here, including the question of ivermectin and the question of vaccine hazards and vaccine hesitancy.
I haven't focused on it because it seemed like there really has not been all that much to say, and it's just a general air of futility around persuading anyone who has decided, for one reason or another, that they're really worried about the COVID vaccines and not all that worried about COVID. That's the bifurcation here.
Imagining that that could be a bifurcating set is so odd, honestly. Even if it was just one thing, what is your position on COVID? That's not going to be a binary position. But then add to that, what is the solution that has no possibility of being a bifurcating position? You know, you cannot have a thing with a decision on top of it in which there's only two possible outcomes. That's just not logically, that doesn't make any sense.
And then there are the rest of us who have the valence on those terms flipped, and we're quite concerned about COVID and not especially concerned about the risk of vaccines. Rather, we were incredibly eager to get vaccinated and to get our kids vaccinated.
It's vaccination day!
Vaccinate, make an appointment!
And we are fairly aghast at and increasingly troubled by the thinking and unjustified certainties coming from the other camp.
I don't care. If you want to get it, great. If you don't want to get it, fine. I'm 36. I got it.
Yeah.
I needed to show my vaccine thing to perform at the Comedy Store. And I imagine it'd be, I'm going to need it to travel. I don't know if I will. Maybe I won't.
Right.
But I'm like, I don't care what you do. That's not enough for people.
No.
You can't. It's, by the way, my opinion is a non-opinion. It's a non-opinion. That's what sets people off.
Anyway, I was avoiding this topic because, again, I don't think there's that much to say on it. But it's pretty obvious now as the pace of vaccination has slowed to a crawl in the United States, and the need for vaccination globally is fairly excruciating.
They want to be told what to do or validated, because then they're back in this good versus evil thing of winners and losers and right and wrong. And I'm on this side and they're on that side. And it gives their meaningless lives meaning. Meaningless lives. Meaningless. And it's not my fault they're meaningless, but they're meaningless because you're mad at me on Twitter for the simple opinion that I don't care what you do. I don't think there's a right answer and a wrong answer in every instance for everything.
The tipping point for me the other day was I was eating at a restaurant and noticed that about half of the waiters were wearing masks and half weren't. And I asked one of them, well, what's the policy here? Are we wearing masks or not wearing masks?
Part of it is that I feel like I'm going to have to rewire myself so that when I see somebody out in the world who's not wearing a mask, I don't instantly think you are a threat or you are selfish or you are a COVID denier and you definitely haven't been vaccinated.
And he said, well, the policy of the restaurant was that if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. And if you're not vaccinated, you do. And in sitting in this restaurant, looking at these waiters who are all podcast listeners.
I mean, we're going to have to rewire the way that we look at each other.
I just know it. I've spoken to a few of them about it. And they're advertising their dangerous confusion on their faces.
I don't care. I truly don't care.
Right, of course.
It doesn't matter. You question why you care. On either side, why it's such a big deal for you. If you get vaccinated, you're vaccinated. If your neighbor doesn't, they're not. You can live together. You can live in a happy world.
I chewed on that for a few minutes after he walked away, and then I looked at all of these young men, they were all men, with a kind of a fresh set of eyes, and realized that there is no reason these guys aren't vaccinated, but for the fact that they have some spurious memes and bad ideas bouncing around their brains, and they were very likely put there by some of my friends.
Upon looking at the evidence in this realm, I was struggling to find a polite way to say, what the fuck is going on here? Because nothing in the context of this set of claims, arguments, or evidence seems to add up in any straightforward way. There is something distorting the entire discussion. And I have the sense that if Sam will look at the podcast he's put out, the claims he has made, and then look at the critiques of those claims and see how they actually line up with what has been said here, he will realize that he has found himself somewhere that he would not ordinarily find himself. And I think the upshot for any honest broker, of which Sam is definitely one, the upshot would have to be, well, how did I end up in this spot, right? How did I end up, and I don't know how to say it more gently, but how did I end up straw manning a friend on such an important topic?
But I thought Eric was one of the best people I could find to walk me through what we currently know or have every reason to believe about vaccines and about the state of our response to COVID. I mean, I'm living in a world where I and all of my friends were profoundly impatient to get vaccinated, and many of us were going to vaccine centers early on and lining up for hours, even whole days, hoping to get some overflow vaccine.
I wanna be immune today. Come on, vaccine.
疫苗都有身份证，查查号码就可辨认，一人一苗一码全程可追。Shout out to our favorite MD, Anthony Fauci.
And now vaccines are ubiquitously available, and we have people who don't want them. I think we have to recognize that everyone is very likely to be in a bubble of sorts here. So it's, I think, I honestly think I only know a few people out of the hundreds of people I know personally. I think I'm only aware of knowing one or two who aren't vaccinated.
Claim right up front to set up, his audience as believing that you're either on this side or not. You've got stars on your belly or you don't. You're one of us or you're one of them, and you better hope you're one of us because we're the science people, we're the reasonable people, we're the Democrats. We're the tribal affiliation, and it's not. That's not how science works.
And I'm sure that anyone who isn't vaccinated is very likely surrounded by people who are not vaccinated, right? So this is analogous to what happens with smokers, right? I think I only know one or two people who still smoke cigarettes, whereas if you smoke cigarettes, I imagine many of your friends are smokers. So we're impressively siloed here, and this is all making it very difficult to talk about what is rational and responsible, because this siloing is not just social, it's with respect to information and sources of information that one deems credible.
There's one difference, though, about that, Sam. Yeah, I think you're making an apt comparison to the smoker circle orbit versus the non-smokers, but the difference is that the smoker circuit isn't directly trying to hurt the non-smokers,
right?
Whereas here we have a harm that's serious, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's worse than secondhand smoke.
You and I have predicted that the unvaccinated will be blamed for the variants and for the upsurge in COVID that is certain to come with the dawning of the northern winter.
Despite predictions from long before COVID that mass vaccination during a pandemic will create selective pressure for new variants.
So you have become well known in certain circles and controversial of late because you have deployed an argument that suggests that the current campaign to vaccinate large numbers of people in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic may be ill-advised.
For me, the alarming point came when I realized, or we realized as a community, that all of a sudden, this was back in November last year, a number of highly infectious variants were popping up almost simultaneously. If you're already having variants before you start your vaccination campaign, and then you're immunizing in the heat of the pandemic, where while the immune response is built up, you're already under attack. Many people, of course, in such situation are going to be experiencing a suboptimal immune response. And hence this will enable mutants that occasionally emerge, of course, to adapt and to gain a competitive advantage and to become dominant in that population. And then, of course, we have a problem.
I wouldn't blame the vaccinated, even though there's an argument to be made that vaccination is playing a key role in the generation of variants. And I don't want to see the unvaccinated blamed.
The virus isn't actually the thing that's killing us, it's ignorance. And in Tennessee, they have finally started re-engaging with vaccination outreach efforts after some backlash.
Especially in light of the fact that the unvaccinated are several different categories, some of which are pretty likely to be blameless. Mm-hmm. Right? So, those who have had COVID and are unvaccinated are not guilty in any conceivable way, right? Likewise, if ivermectin actually works the way the evidence seems to suggest it does, people who have gone out of their way to protect themselves in this alternative form are actually much less likely to be contributing.
When you poll people in these various groups, the reasons they give for not being vaccinated tend to focus on concerns about the newness of the vaccines.
These vaccines we have established through, I think, incontrovertible logic here. These vaccines are not safe, right? Whatever we can say about the harm that they do or not or don't do, the fact that we don't know anything about their long-term impacts at least opens the possibility that they do something that's bad that we shouldn't want to happen to people, and that means they're not safe in the same way a gun of unknown loadedness is not safe.
And therefore they're likely to be dangerous, right? And then you add to this distrust of the government and and also just a belief that they don't actually need a vaccine because the risk of COVID has been greatly exaggerated. This is basically the picture you get of why people are not getting vaccinated.
You and I have been COVID hawks, right? We have been very careful about COVID. And initially enthusiastic about the idea of vaccines, concerned about what we didn't know about them going forward, and then increasingly alarmed by what we have seen in the data emerging about vaccine hazards.
One of the most important reasons that people gave, and you can understand it, is that the FDA didn't give full approval yet, and it's still being categorized as an emergency use. And so that, you can understand people being skeptical without this final blessing by the FDA. And the sad part is the people who are not getting the benefit of the vaccine, a lot of it is because they're just, they're on social media, they're getting fed misinformation. And by the way, we also know the Russians are involved. This is part of this, mission of their divisiveness.
Well, the White House commented on what I said about vaccines.
It's so funny. Fauci hit you up.
Well, he didn't hit me up necessarily. He disagreed with me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got vaxxed up, baby.
Did you?
I got one shot in the arm.
But didn't you already get COVID?
Yeah, I had Rona. I had it in October.
So why did you get a vaccination?
I'm a sheeple, dude. I'm part of the sheep, dude. I wanted it.
Yeah, remember Joe Rogan? Joe Rogan would play off the virus in public, but in private, people said that he was freaking out about it, having stuff wiped down with alcoholic wipes and being very fastidious with checking, very paranoid. It's a brand.
The reason why this is so upside down is you have many, many millions of people who believe some combination of the following, that the risk of COVID, the disease, has been vastly exaggerated, right? COVID is a hoax, or it's just a flu, or it's just not a factor.
Speaking of friends, I have told Joe Rogan twice on his program that I thought he was not concerned enough about COVID, right? So that's just a gentle critique, which is this is a very dangerous disease. The hazard of it is not captured in the case fatality rate. The case fatality rate is reasonably low, but the amount of damage and therefore probably the years of people's lives that are lost to this disease is very high.
Right. So it's we just have literally tens of millions of people who are totally sanguine about the prospect of catching COVID, but really averse to the idea of getting vaccinated for COVID. And obviously from our point of view, that's totally upside down. But this is the balance that has to be, the results of which have to be fairly judged.
It's one thing COVID has taught us. Common sense ain't that common. Alabama is far from alone. Red states with low vaccination rates are driving up the national surge. States like Arkansas, where CNN talked to Americans who refuse to get vaccinated, including the parents of an 8-year-old child sick with COVID.
He was sick a lot. He's been sick a lot for a while, and he's still sick. So we'll have to go get him looked at and see if there's further damage. I don't know. I mean, because he got real sick. Yeah. Fever every day for weeks.
Are you guys going to get the vaccine?
No. Okay. No vaccine.
How come?
I just don't trust the government.
There are people who are scared of the vaccine, and that is because they have been subjected to this overwhelming onslaught of propaganda, and I feel for them, but this is not the time to be sympathetic towards them. This is not their time for sympathy. This is not their victimhood. This is victimhood they're inflicting on other people.
I'm a sheep.
Well, it's not being a sheep. There's some legitimate science behind this. It's not. This is like the thing about this whole thing. This people being upset at me. I didn't say I'm not an anti-vax person.
Right.
In fact, I said I believe they're safe, and I encourage many people to take them. My parents were vaccinated. I just said I don't think that if you're a young, healthy person that you need it.
The reason why I'm excited, and I know a lot of people are excited about your being here, is that you fall under the category of what we call as a trusted messenger.
First question is, why is it important for young people to get vaccinated?
There is a misperception that young people will never have any problem with COVID-19. It's true that statistically, it's less likely for a young person to get a severe outcome from COVID-19, but it isn't zero. You want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Right, totally. And how many people under 18 do you think have gotten vaccinated already?
Well, we have the larger proportion of the people under 18 are not vaccinated. We really want to get that level way up.
But now that there is seemingly a decision taken and a strong recommendation to also enroll youngsters in the COVID-19 mass vaccination campaign, and even children, I have changed my mind, and I feel like it is an obligation to continue and still do this very last video, because this is simply unacceptable, and it is just going to make the situation much worse.
Fauci, who has demonstrated a willingness to lie to us about masks and has also demonstrated rotten judgment with respect to gain-of-function research, is now telling us, and in the clip, I didn't show you the Fauci clip, but he talks about the fact that we're going to need to vaccinate children. Well, there are reasons you wouldn't want to. Even if this vaccine thing was safe enough for us adults, there are multiple reasons why, as the risk of serious COVID drops off with kids, you might want to exclude them. One, they're still going through development. You could be impacting their development in a way that wouldn't put us adults at risk, but will put them at risk. Two, they're going to live longer. That means the downstream consequences of something we don't know about these vaccines is that much greater. 3, the value to them is much lower if they're not going to get particularly sick from COVID. And so, the relative degree to which that risk is not warranted in their case is substantial.
One side, you have the risk of COVID plus the effectiveness of the vaccines weighed against the risks of vaccination. Because, this is really a forced choice.
There is a huge pressure to get vaccinated, even for people for whom this is insane, right? Giving a vaccine to people who already have the very same immunity that the vaccine will give them because they've already had COVID, right, means that whatever unknown risks are downstream, you're exposing them to for no good reason. So that's weird that they are not. Even just
it is weird.
It's the easiest thing in the world to get vaccinated. There's opportunities, tens of thousands of pharmacies, of vaccine community centers, even mobile units that go out into areas that are poorly accessible. So it's easy and it's free. We got to keep that message going. So when you talk to your millions of people who follow you, remember, it's easy and it's free.
The vaccines are free. You can just go get them anywhere now. If you're over 12, you can get them anywhere. There's no excuse. This is not a high wall to pass.
Unless you're going to be perfectly in hiding, you're going to be exposed to the novel coronavirus, and it's some variant or many variants thereof. And you can either be exposed having been fully vaccinated or not having been fully vaccinated. And this should be simple to talk about, and the comparative risks should be simple to assess now, because we have many, many millions of people who have run this experiment. We've got millions of people who have caught COVID without the benefit of a vaccine. We've got millions of people who've been vaccinated, and we can assess the negative side effects of getting these vaccines. All of this can be assessed.
I want Sam to see that he has ended up somewhere that should cause all of us to be scratching our heads, because I think the problem is, no matter what position you land on this logical map, none of this makes sense. There is something distorting our ability to see what our friends are saying. There's something that is distorting our ability to understand what the evidence actually implies. And that means that everybody is ending up in some sort of paradoxical landscape.